Not to rip off an old scab, but I think a lot of us, we all want to just believe that COVID's behind us. Those of us that made it, maybe we didn't get vaccinated. Some questions are, is this thing shedding on me, pop up? But we all kind of want to move forward. But the question is, did you survive it? Did we actually survive that? What was it really all about? And do we have enough people to make sure that it never happens again? And why would we try to stop it? And would they try to do it again? What is this? What's really going on here? Well, to get in this conversation, and my next guest that is really about to blow your mind, I just want to remind you how insane this experience we all went through together was.
A mystery virus in China.
The city of Wuhan is racing to contain the potential spread of a deadly new strain of coronavirus.
Italy has become the worst hit country by the coronavirus after China. There's now more than 1,000 deaths and more than 15,000 infections.
The government is already talking about that triage situation, having to prioritize how they are going to save the most number of people.
We have called every day for countries to take urgent and aggressive action.
We'll be suspending all travel from Europe to the United States.
The coronavirus is the biggest threat this country has faced for decades. We're seeing the devastating impact of this invisible killer.
If community transmission takes off in New Zealand, our health system will be inundated and tens of thousands of New Zealanders will die.
Hospitals are already running out of beds, masks, supplies, and testing material.
The number of hospitalizations here in New York jumped 40%.
Field hospitals and testing centers in places like the Maryland Stadium, the LA Convention Center to be used as a hospital too.
The hospital has 500 beds and is over capacity.
All the patients in this room, all the feet that you see, they all have COVID.
It's hard for me to say, but you can actually smell fear. You smell death.
1 in 7 Americans will likely know someone who has died from this disease, something that we didn't even know 5-6 months ago.
Stay at home, that is the order tonight from 4 state governors as the coronavirus pandemic spreads.
The experience we're having on the ground throughout the state of California require us to adjust our thinking.
Stay at home.
Stay home, stay safe.
Quite simply, stay at home.
We can all come together while staying at home.
Stay home.
Stay at home.
Stay at home.
Prepare, focus on the essentials. Protect, keep some space from people outside your home. And disinfect a lot.
Protect yourself and others from COVID-19. Stay home and help stop the spread of the coronavirus.
Across the country, at least 21 million kids now home from school.
Worried customers have been snapping up everything in sight. Store shelves nationwide are dwindling or totally empty. Produce gone. Cleaning products low. Bleach totally bought out.
The situation here yesterday was so hectic, police were called after some customers started fighting over toilet paper and water.
A violent confrontation over mask wearing going viral on social media. This video already viewed hundreds of thousands of times and now the subject of a police investigation.
This is in Royal Palm Beach, tempers flaring when one man not wearing a mask pulls a gun.
Suspect turns around and throws a punch as he and another were being escorted out the door for not wearing a mask.
More than 46,000.
150,000.
200,000.
400,000 people have now died.
500,071 dead.
In every corner, frontline medical workers in ERs, ICUs, and COVID units who've seen firsthand the pandemic's horrors. The most ambitious vaccination program in history is only just beginning.
More Americans have to roll up their sleeves and face the reality that vaccination is the pathway to that result.
Almost everyone who will die from COVID this year will not be up to date on their shots.
You'll either get the vaccine or COVID. And I'll tell you which one of those can kill you.
Pretty much everyone who's unvaccinated is going to expect to get sick.
The hospital says the majority of their COVID-related deaths are among patients who are unvaccinated.
It's madness. Get vaccinated.
Unvaccinated guy who gobbled horse goo. Rest in peace, Wheezy.
When the next pandemic comes, if we do not make
the changes that must be made, then who will?
We don't know when the next outbreak is going to be. It could be a year from now, it could be 30 years from now, but we still have to be perpetually prepared.
This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset.
This moment also gives us a much greater chance to be radical and to do things differently, to build back better and to build back bolder.
We can't just build back to what it was before. We have to build back better.
I see the need for action. I see the need for a great reset.
Yeah, I was there too. So were you. I just want to remind you as we go into this next conversation that after all of that insanity, when all the numbers got crunched, this virus had a death rate of approximately 0.35% across the world, a third of 1%. It was just a bad flu. And if you were under the age of 59, you were in the 0.035%. I just want to remind you, 0 to 19, did they need a vaccine? The death rate for them was 0.0027%. 2029, 0.014. You get the idea. These were zeros in any math class in the world. This was a manufactured disaster that destroyed our economies, destroyed our lives. And what we've got to ask ourselves is why? It's probably the main question we've been asking. Why? Why do they do it, and who is the they? Well, I just read a brand new book that is out now, The Indoctrinated Brain. And this blew my mind. Where I thought I'd had it all figured out, this nails it to the wall. And I am just honored beyond measure to be joined now by the author, Dr. Michael Nehls.
Del, thank you. I'm honored too, being on this great show. Thank you very much.
It's really great having you. It's hard to even know where to start because there is just so many different points that you're making in here. And what I want to say is you bring up Matthias Desmet in the beginning of this book. And I would say of probably all the interviews I did over the last couple of years, one of my top favorites was we had Matthias Desmet here. And of course, he was talking about mass formation. And he said something that really stuck with me, which is you've got to see the people that have gone along with this as though they've been hypnotized. If someone's hypnotized, they'll cut off their arm if you ask them to do it. And I kept thinking that as I was talking to friends and family around the country over the holidays, and it does almost feel like their eyes are spinning. There's certain trigger words. You say Trump and this Trump derangement syndrome, all of a sudden the conversation changes and it's like they're not home. They're like zombies. But you take this to another level. You take it beyond just the psychology of sort of how they manage to brainwash us or hypnotize us. You actually get into the clinical, medical side of this spike protein and of this vaccine and the effect that that had as a part of dumbing us down or, changing actually how our mind is working. What gives you the background to even get into that conversation?
Well, first of all, I have a background in molecular genetics and particularly in immunology, and so I realized very quickly that it was not about the virus. So from the immunology point of view, it was totally clear there had to be something else behind that.
And was that pretty instantaneous? At what point? I mean, I always like to ask this to my guests because even here on the show, we were involved in looking at vaccines long before this COVID thing happened, but I just remember people dropping in the streets, and first I was like, well, that's alarming. But then the numbers just stopped adding up. But at what point did you start to question the narrative?
Well, the numbers didn't add up, and in particular, it was clear already for decades that even dying from influenza was caused by something we call a cytokine storm. That means an overreaction of the immune system producing what we call pro-inflammatory cytokines. This is a natural reaction, actually, first that if we have an infection, we produce these. But if we overreact, then of course the cytokines themselves become the dangerous part of the disease. Actually, it's not the immune system, it's not the virus that kills, it's the immune system itself that is dysfunct, it's not regulated correctly. And it's known already since, let's say, 30 years, that the main cause, particularly for the seasonality of these diseases, the respiratory diseases,
seasonality, yep, right.
is based on the low level of vitamin D in the population. And it was.
So you're saying winter time, less sun, sun's lower, less time absorbing this vitamin. We know now it's a critical building block of our immune systems, and that's why over the winters everyone starts getting those holiday flus and colds and things like that.
Yeah, exactly, and that was known already for decades, and still it was only a vaccination program that was supposedly helpful, you know, to avoid the disease or avoid a difficult cause of the disease, even death. But it was not true. It just gave people vitamin D, and we have a reduced number of people being affected. Was actually shown at a higher level of vitamin D, a natural level, not really high. We talk about a natural level, a level that you, for example, measure in people in Africa who don't eat vitamin D, they don't eat fish, which contains vitamin D. They just are out in the sun, and they have a level of about 120, 130 nanomole per liter. And that was actually a level which was shown in 2021 that it protects to 100% from severe COVID cases.
Right.
And
I remember, I think it was at a level of 50, they said you could not find anyone that died of COVID that was 50 or above.
Yeah, that's
the number.
probably true, but the numbers were published, and actually the German Cancer Research Center, which is really a high-valued, scientific center in Germany, pretty much like the MIT in Harvard, and they published a paper based on data that peer-reviewed that was in fall 2020, before the vaccine program started. Mm-hmm. I actually don't call it vaccine at all. I call it spiking, because it's.
I love that. You have a different.
It's all about getting the spike protein into the body.
Right.
That's what we are talking about later on.
We'll get to that in just a moment.
Sure, but the point is that in fall 2020, the German Cancer Research Center published a paper that 9 of 10 COVID deaths could have been prevented by just giving enough vitamin D to the people. And it was proven at the same time in an experiment in a hospital that people who actually came into the hospital with severe COVID, severe enough that they couldn't stay at home anymore, so they had to go to the hospital. And of course, the question was now, do they have to go to the intensive care unit? Do they have to get artificial breathing? Do they die?
Yeah.
So what do we do? And these people, it was a university hospital in the south of Spain. What they did is they elevated the vitamin D level very quickly. Not by giving vitamin D, because what you measure as vitamin D in the body as vitamin D level is actually the prohormone of vitamin D. It's a modified version of it that is created in the liver.
Okay.
And that's actually the prohormone that is turned into the hormone which regulates, for example, genes that are regulating our immune system.
Okay.
So they elevated the prohormone.
So vitamin D is not technically, it's not a vitamin as much as it's a hormone.
Yeah, vitamin D is actually, when it's transformed in the body, it's an actual hormone, and this hormone regulates the functions in the brain.
Okay.
So, for example, with low levels of vitamin D compared to the natural levels of 125, compared to, let's say, 25, you have a 70% higher rate, for example, of Alzheimer's. So by just getting the level to 125 nanomoles per liter.
There's a takeaway point.
Yeah, it's actually in the book, because we talk later about the Alzheimer's, because Alzheimer's is actually a disease starting in the so-called hippocampus. It's our autobiographical memory center. That's why I call Alzheimer's also the hippocampal dementia.
Okay.
And you can prevent it. It's known to be that we can prevent it. And that's the second part of my education that allowed me to write this book. So the first part was the immunological part. The other one is the neurological part. Okay. Because here everything comes together.
Right.
And my wife actually asked me, why did I write the book and not somebody else out of 8 billion people? And I was actually wondering myself, because the data are out there. There's all these pieces of the puzzle I put together, but these pieces were out there for everybody to see. But maybe I saw them because I have 2 specialities, immunology and neurobiology. And then when you look from both parts, you can actually put these puzzle pieces together to a picture, seamless. And then you see it completely different, have a completely different view what's actually going on. Now going back to the data we had on vitamin D, it was totally clear that people wouldn't die from COVID, but still there was no interest actually to provide people vitamin D. So when the first trial started with this spiking program, vaccination for those who didn't get my
We'll stick with spiking program. I think we got it.
Yeah, so when they did the trials, I was asking myself, whenever I wanted to make a clinical trial, I have to test my new product against the best alternative that's out there.
Right.
Well, the best alternative, based on research, like for example from the German Cancer Research Center, is to give people vitamin D. So you compare the vaccination, the spiking, you have to compare to people who actually get enough vitamin D. But with vitamin D, nobody dies. So what does a vaccine do? Nothing.
Right.
So, but they didn't do the trial like this. They actually told us you don't have to use vitamin D. Vitamin D is dangerous. The New England Journal of Medicine published in fall 2020, they published that nobody needs vitamin D. Even if there's a deficiency in vitamin D, you don't need it. And physicians should stop testing vitamin D, and people should stop supplementing vitamin D, even if they have a deficit. That's the New England Journal of Medicine. By the way, the same journal that published most of these trials on the spiking program. So
it's incredible. And to your point, as you point out in the book, if this really was a public health measure, we would have gone with, first of all, the fastest and cheapest route, even while we're waiting for the vaccine. Maybe the vaccine's going to be great, maybe it won't. But why didn't every health department say, at least bump up your vitamin D, get your vitamin D up, you're going to do a lot better here. They didn't do that, and to your point, they went the opposite direction. They basically attacked. We had a chiropractor on here that got sued for $500 billion by the United States of America for recommending vitamin D.
Okay, that fits the bill. I mean, coming back to this study I wanted to discuss, in the study they gave not vitamin D, but vitamin D prohormone. Okay. That is essentially the form that is circulating in the blood, and that's what you usually measure when you measure vitamin D. And you have to pump up this quickly. If you just give vitamin D and not the vitamin D prohormone, it takes 3, 4, 5 days before the level goes up. But you can imagine if you come to the hospital severely ill,
you don't have much time.
You don't have 4 or 5 days.
Right.
So they gave the vitamin D prohormone and the level went up quickly. The consequence, compared to the control group, it was a control trial. Nobody died. Nobody went to the intensive care unit. Compared to the control group, so the risk of getting into the intensive care unit was 25 times higher without vitamin D prohormone.
Wow.
So this study should have immediately triggered something, and it was published 3 months before the vaccination program started.
Wow.
So it was all known. And of course, at that point, I was asking myself, why is this happening? And now coming back to my research on Alzheimer's disease, I knew that neuroinflammation, the inflammation in the brain, is the major cause of Alzheimer's. And it's caused usually by a lifestyle that is not healthy, a lifestyle that is far away from our natural lifestyle. So we have deficiencies, not only by vitamin D, maybe also omega-3 fatty acids. We don't walk enough. And what I realized, and I published this in a peer-reviewed paper in 2016, it's called Unified Theory of Alzheimer's Disease.
Okay.
And in this paper, I show that the production of nerve cells in our autobiographical memory, if this is down, you get
autobiographical memory.
Yeah, it's essentially our
story we're writing
about ourselves. Everything that we think about, everything that we experience, everything we talk about with other people, everything is stored in our brain, but in one particular region of the brain, which has an anatomical structure that looks like a seahorse.
Okay. Yep.
And the Latin or the Greek word for seahorse is hippocampus.
Oh, okay.
And that's why it's called the hippocampus. And the hippocampus has the ability for the whole life. Here we see a picture.
Yep.
It's in here in the temporal lobe, like the size of a thumb.
Okay.
Here on both sides, and it has the ability to grow the wealth of our experience over the whole lifetime. Even if you get 120 years old, you still can remember new things every day without forgetting old things. That's what the hippocampus allows you.
Okay.
But only under one premise: it has to produce new nerve cells every day.
Okay, so it has to keep producing.
Yeah, because it's limited in size, and if your wealth of experience grows, it has to grow as well. And it can.
It's like expanding your hard drive.
Yeah, it's constantly growing. And the growth is really instrumental for many things. Not only that your memory stays sharp over your whole life, it also has additional abilities. So these new nerve cells, which are produced, the technical term is adult, because it's still happening when we are grown up.
Okay.
Adult hippocampal, because it's happening only in the hippocampus. Neurogenesis. So genesis meaning birth.
So adult hippocampal neurogenesis.
Yeah, adult hippocampal neurogenesis. And this process, if this is ongoing, it prevents completely the likelihood that you get Alzheimer's. So the only thing you have to do is fertilize your brain, yeah, with something that the brain needs. And from an evolutionary perspective, it's totally clear what we need. So if these cells are growing, they provide you with something which we call curiosity. These are actually I would say, the neuronal correlate for human curiosity. If these cells are not working, if they're not produced, you're not curious anymore.
Wow.
You try to remain in your normal life behavior, but you don't want to get out of it. You don't want to think out of the box. So they are the main reason we are curious. But when you are curious, you have the idea to go into new fields of thinking, maybe in new areas of walking. You change your terrain where you have been living before. These are all things that are kind of potentially dangerous. So what these cells also provide you with is the psychological resilience. So if these cells are not growing, your psychological resilience is down. And you can be essentially led by fear-mongering very easily.
Right.
Everything that is kind of frightful is dangerously frightful for you because you don't have these cells.
So you're saying your curiosity is what takes you out the door. It's what allows you to take risks. I'm curious enough. I'm going to get outside my comfort zone.
Exactly.
As we lose that curiosity, we get more and more controlled. We want our environment to stay controlled. I was just talking about this with my wife. In a lot of young people, I see this, like a fear of change. Like you change the schedule or something, it's like the end of the world.
But that's completely unnatural.
Right.
Natural would be that we grow our wealth of experience. And actually, that's the main reason humans get so old, older than their reproduction phase. Like chimpanzee, for example, when they are 45, 50 years old, a few years after they have given the last birth, they actually die. They only get 55, maybe 60 years old. Humans can get up to 120 years old.
Beyond and way past.
And the main reason that's actually published and well reviewed is the grandmother hypothesis, which says being alive as a grandmother creates the likelihood that you provides the likelihood or increases the likelihood that your grandchildren survive. That's published until the end of the 19th century. It's known that for every decade a grandmother lives, she has 2 grandchildren that grow up to adulthood. That makes her genes essentially survive. So,
wow.
But that only works.
Is that because she takes care of them and is a part of the family? Like when
many things. She provides help. She's able to help.
Yeah.
And she has wisdom. It's not like 100 years ago you couldn't ask Google what you have to do. You have to ask grandmother.
Right.
And that's actually known, and it's published well, and it's essentially a fact. And the point is, the only way to get grandmothers and grandparents and grandfathers, of course, as well, because they share the same genes, is that they grow their wealth of experience up to the oldest age. And that's only possible because we are essentially, by nature, allowed to produce new nerve cells up to the highest age in the hippocampus. And these cells, as I said, provide us with the ability to grow our wealth of experience, but also to be curious, that we actually learn new things. And if the grandmother wouldn't learn new things, then she would be dumb. And
so if we take grandma away from the family, not involved, not taking walks, not meeting grandchildren, chasing them around the room, and we stick her in an old folks' home to sit in a quiet room by herself, does she die quicker?
Absolutely, and it enhances very fast the development of Alzheimer's and depression. Because since these cells also provide us with a high level of psychological resilience, their production, if you shut the production down, the result is a high level or high risk of getting depression. Actually, all antidepressiva, all drugs against depression, do one thing in common, that is activating the production of these nerve cells. But of course, it doesn't work if you don't add other things to it that these cells need. So without vitamin D, without, let's say, omega-3 fatty acids, without maybe enough hiking, without experiences that these cells have to essentially code, they wouldn't survive. So you need essentially a natural habitat that you can really easily explain from an evolutionary perspective. So taking this all together, and I published another book, and I just actually wrote a scientific paper about it, is that, and there was a Nobel Prize in 2002 to Daniel Kahneman, who showed that being able to make decisions in situations where it's demanded maybe to get out of the comfort zone, to really think, that you need some kind of mental energy. And what I've shown in the paper before this one, it's called The Exhausted Brain, but hasn't been translated yet into English, it's only in German, but it was a bestseller there. In The Exhausted Brain, I show that the mental energy is provided by these nerve cells. If these nerve cells are there, you are eager to learn and to think. But if they are not there, you're not eager to think. And essentially, this is what you are missing. You don't have the mental energy to think. And that's what happens usually in people when they, during the day. If I work very hard during the first hours of the day, at least in the maybe in the afternoon, and latest in the evening, I'm what science call ego depleted. I'm out of mental energy.
Yeah.
So that's no problem, because overnight these cells grow back, grow.
Importance of sleep.
Yeah, and in the morning, because they only grow when we sleep, in the morning, hundreds of these cells are there again, and my ego is replenished, and I can start thinking and driving again, being curious again, and learn new things. So these cells we can regard as the mental immune system of humans. You have to think about this from, let's say, an evolutionary point of view again, or let's say the evolutionary imperative is to be futile and to multiply. Yeah,
right.
That's the imperative. We can also read, of course, in the Bible, but it's the imperative of the evolution. The two of us wouldn't be sitting here if our parents and grandparents and so forth haven't essentially obeyed to this imperative.
Right.
Okay, but in order to actually be fertile, you have to grow up. In order to grow up, you have to defend your life all the time.
Yeah.
Against microorganisms, it's clear. We defend with our bodily immune system, the immune cells against microorganisms which could be pathogenic. But we also have to have an immune system against macroorganisms that could be pathogenic.
Right.
Maybe animals, but mostly other humans.
Right.
The only way to protect yourself against other humans.
We're in a constant battle with microorganisms. Our body's having to fight. We're fighting to stay alive. Macroorganisms, things that are coming
that want
from the outside.
Dominate our life, for example.
Right.
So we have our mental immune system, our memory of things of the past, how the communication with other people. We have the ability to think about these things. We have and come up with solutions.
Yeah.
So we have a mental immune system. This mental immune system is essentially crucially depending on the ability to produce these new nerve cells. If we don't produce these nerve cells, our mental immune system breaks down.
Right.
Now, in 2002, 2003, when SARS-CoV-1 was out there, and I was working already on the idea that these cells are essentially
SARS-CoV-1 , so right.
SARS-CoV-1, yeah, exactly.
Before SARS-CoV-2.
Yeah, SARS-CoV-1 tried to make a pandemic, didn't manage really, but was scientifically published at the time is that the spike protein activates the immune system producing pro-inflammatory cytokines. And what's already published at the time is that the spike protein, when activating the immune system, then the pro-inflammatory cytokines shut down the production of nerve cells in the hippocampus. Actually, it's the best.
So this was known all the way back in SARS-CoV-1, that it's inspiring a cytokine reaction that is shutting down these neurons in your hippocampus that you need to keep creating in order to avoid Alzheimer's at the very least, but also to keep expanding the hard drive, if you will, that's storing your memory and your ability to...
Or survive an attack by other, let's say, human beings that want to maybe conquer your life. you have to see it not only from the person's perspective, you have to see it from the society. If I want to dominate a society, I have to shut down the immune system of the society.
Right.
Of course, it would nice the bodily immune system, but even more important, the mental immune system. And the best point of attack is the shutdown of the adult hippocampal neurogenesis. That's the best point of attack. And with SARS-CoV-1, it was shown that by activating the immune system, producing the pro-inflammatory cytokines, the very same cytokines that we see in the cytokine storm, these cytokines shut down completely the production of nerve cells in the hippocampus, essentially shut down the mental immune system. So when this Nobel Prize 2023 was given to the spiking program, and I read about that these scientists who got it came up with the idea 15 years ago, I started to count back and said, well, if they had the idea at that time, how can we actually make sure that enough spike protein enters the brain to permanently shut down the production of these nerve cells? Well, I have to maybe create a vaccine. And this vaccine should maybe be tempered with in a little way that it produces a portion of the spike protein that efficiently enters the brain by crossing the blood-brain barrier. And by putting in the furin cleavage site, it actually does. So the spiking, but also the infection causes essentially the transfer of this S1 subunit, which is the part which is clipped off of the spike protein by the furin molecular scissors that we have in our body.
Heard a lot about, we've talked a lot on this show, the S1.
Exactly.
Right, yep.
It enters the brain and causes brain fog, for example. That's the mild version of it. And it was actually shown that if the receptor for the spike protein, which is called TLR4, if this receptor, for example, is very weak in its activity by genetic variants, then you don't get brain fog. If it's very high in its activity, you get very likely brain fog.
Right.
But if the receptor for the spike protein is activated, it leads to the production of interleukin-1, interleukin-6, pro-inflammatory cytokines, and they shut down the adult hippocampal neurogenesis.
So you're hypothesizing that if you were going to say, because what we're talking about is creative thought, curiosity, those things that make someone an independent individual, taking risks, going out in the world, not shuddering at home and staying afraid. If you needed to control that population, if you wanted them to not be as difficult to manage, to not strike out on their own, remove their independence, remove their autobiographical story that makes them feel like an individual, you would want to shut down the development of those neurons that need to keep growing in the hippocampus. And you're saying that this S1 is the perfect delivery system. It's what it does. It goes in and shuts exactly that part of the brain down, and then suddenly this virus comes along. The virus has one issue. You can be infected, but the vaccine itself isolates the part of this that would be the perfect delivery system.
Yeah, absolutely. The infection essentially is, or the fear from the infection essentially is the means to get everybody to accept.
Actually infect themselves.
Yeah, and it's even worse, because now I started to think about what actually happens besides shutting down the immune system. Something else happens. Even if you are ego depleted in the evening, naturally, that you have done a lot of, let's say, socially or creative work, social work, and you have learned a lot, and your hippocampus is full. So you're ego depleted, and that's the main cause you go to sleep.
Right.
To essentially recharge the energy.
And as you said, it's almost like that hard drive, it's like the thumb has to drive and sort of dump the information and clear to get ready for the next day. It's why
absolutely.
Sleep is really important.
That's exactly what's happening,
right.
and it is described in detail how it works. But that's completely natural. But you can imagine, even in the evening, I'm a medical doctor, so in the evening, if a friend calls and says, oh, my wife or my kid is very sick, can you help me? Of course, I'm not telling him on the phone, well, I'm ego depleted right now, call me next morning. Of course, I will react to it. And I will remember that I have reacted to it.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens? I was just telling, I have no neurons to actually memorize. So it's still possible. There is an emergency mechanism. It's quite easy to understand. What happens is the memories from the day will be overwritten, by the new memories. So I lose essentially memory content from the day before.
So I reuse those neurons that I've already used.
I just essentially use them for something new, which is now actually more important than maybe something else. And I'm starting to override things. I might override even the memory of a birthday 20 years ago, a birthday celebration. I might override pieces of that because I memorize something new in an emergency situation. This is not really problematic, of course. That's why an emergency situation happens. But consider this emergency situation is now a chronic situation. Let's say you shut down the index, I call them index neurons because they index all our memories. If the neurons that are produced by the adult hippocampal neurogenesis, they are indexing all our memories. So if I shut down the index neuron production completely, and I force people, not by calling them, I have an emergency, but the emergency is a world crisis in climate. It's a world crisis about another pandemic. It's a world crisis about maybe a nuclear war because people are fighting nonsensically over certain borders. All these things are, of course, also emergencies, global emergencies, and they have impact on my daily life. So I will remember. But I can't actually because I don't have new index neurons because the spike protein has taken care of them. We don't have adult hippocampal neurogenesis. So what happens? The narratives that are the mainstream telling me start to override piece by piece all the things that make up my personality. Everything, all my memories are overwritten. This is a much more dramatic way of, it's just like indoctrination 2.0.
You make such a good point. You're probably getting to it, but just because I found it so shocking and really made me think about my own lifestyle. You talk about that in movies all the time, we show people being brainwashed while they're asleep, right? We put like a mantra, and then while they sleep, they suddenly, take that information in and it changes their mind. And you said in the book, actually science has shown that that doesn't work at all. Like they've tried it in every way, shape, or form, it doesn't actually work. But what does work is if you can reprogram the brain right before it goes to sleep, right before it does that download and drops the information off the drive, if you can fill that drive with fear or an impulse or information, or as you point out, this moment, so many of us are ending our night with the nightly news. We sit there and we turn on the TV, and the last thing we do when our mind is exhausted and just, out of neurons to use, we overwrite all of the great experiences of the day with this droning fear and depression and anger and war, deceit, judgment, and overwrite it, and then we go to sleep, and then that gets transferred over.
Absolutely.
And that just found that to be just really mind-blowing point, and we're doing it to ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And the problem is the index neurons, they remain in the hippocampus of the whole life. These are the ones that essentially the content of everything we learn is uploaded into the neocortical, let's say, hard drive, I say. Yeah. This is where the upload happens in the night. In the first deep sleep phases of the night, the slow wave sleep, everything is uploaded. The only information that remains is when and where we learned something or thought about something. And this when and where is encoded by these new neurons that are produced by adult hippocampal neurogenesis. And that's why I call them index neurons. And these index neurons stay in the hippocampus, and you have to add every day new index neurons. Otherwise, you would start overriding previous experiences. Now, it's not just what we learned over the day that is overwritten in the evening, things that we have learned in the past, because there's a whole selection of index neurons that can be used.
Right.
But if you shut down index neuron production completely, then you essentially over maybe months, but maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, what happens is that you override almost everything. And then what ends up is you have people that are just, their personality is nothing else than the narrative. And what we experienced already is these informations become part of their personality. Mm-hmm. And that explains also why people, when you question this narrative in family discussions, hey, I've just got this information about this virus is dangerous for whatever reason, or we have to get this 3rd, 4th, 5th injection. And he said, oh, wait a moment, I have other data. Look at this. It's almost like you step on their toes. And that's, you go into their private room in their privacy, room of personality, and that's actually what's happening. Because these narratives have become part of their personality already. And you don't want to question your personality.
Right.
Nobody wants that. It's natural. But it shows already what's going on. And the long-term problem is quite clear. I mean, you have had the intro with the Great Reset. The Great Reset is essentially a new operating system that is installed in to humanity. Like a digital operating system, DOS, we have, I call it in the book, a social operating system, SOS, like Save Our Souls.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean by it. It's a social operating system, and like with the DOS system, I remember from my past when I had to install a new version, I had to erase the old one completely. Right. Otherwise, the new rules would be in conflict with the old rules.
Right.
So now the same thing happens with humans. You have to install a new operating system, the Great Reset narratives. But you don't want to have the conflict internally with old informations, like how was the world before? And so you have to erase essentially and reformat the hard drive in our brain, and the best way to do that is override the index neurons. And that's what's happening, it's my opinion. And everything that we discussed, or you discussed in your show today, like the increases in death rates, the VAERS data, you know, on all these diseases, autoimmune, the extreme rise in depression and Alzheimer's, which are all hippocampal diseases, can be explained, but are all, in my opinion, only a collateral damage of the main purpose, that is to transform the mind to accept a new way of operating system of the society. And this operating system has to be a global one, because the narrative tells us these threats that now became personalities, you know, for the people that become their new personality, all these threats are global. And no government in the world, no individual government can solve the problem. So who can solve the problem? A world government.
Right.
So the very people who essentially started this whole program, this war on the human brain, are the ones who tell us now they are also the ones who can solve the problem. Yeah?
Right.
Install a new global...
Stockholm syndrome you talk about. I mean, this idea of like we end up, you know, the very people that attack us, kidnap us, take away all of our rights, then they end up being the ones, we're your salvation, we're going to take care of you, and in the end, we won't even run for help. We think we're with the people that help us.
Yeah.
When you were saying, you know, the uploading the system or updating the system, I think about my cell phone update. I think about how many times people go, oh, don't touch that new update. It messes your whole phone up. I was thinking about this as I was reading this. So many of us right now that somehow managed to escape getting the vaccine, critical thinking kicked in, we didn't, you know, we kept, you know, growing our adult neurons, hippocampal neurons. And so, but I was like, it's like we dodged that update. We didn't get the update. And now the world has a problem. Now these world leaders have a problem. It's actually a pretty large group of people that are now walking the planet that are not working on the same operating system as everybody else.
Yeah, and this is the group that is really the group that gives me hope.
Yeah.
This is the group that gives me hope. And it's actually interesting. It's like 22% roughly, if we judge it by the rate of the ones who accepted, you know, the spiking program and the ones who didn't. And this 22% is actually the percentage that the very famous confirmation experiment by Solomon Nash in the mid-1950s showed. He showed that people believe their own mind and not believe the masses if they are actually looking at the data and they see that the data are correct, and even the mass says, no, it's not correct. They believe their common sense and not follow the mass. And it might be actually genetic that such a percentage exists. Because this is my belief, because if everybody would follow the mass, if this percentage who doubts things,
why does the group doesn't? I personally, I give my parents some credit for socializing me. I mean, they socialized me to not trust to not trust authority. They were 60s hippies, pulled me out of school, homeschooled me, said, they're trying to brainwash you, we're not going to allow that. Now, I don't know, maybe, and I always question that. Do I have some internal moral authority that allows me to do this show and not buy into what's going on? And one of the conversations, several of the conversations I had over the holidays is what people don't know about me is I also am as skeptical of the conspiracy theory narrative too. I don't buy any of it. Like, I don't just buy in, you know, right now we're doing investigations of chemtrails. Just some of it I'm looking at, but some of the science isn't adding up to it. And I'm being honest in that investigation. I don't just and I've said to friends, across the board, I'm skeptical. I'm curious.
Yeah, that's what we have to be. I mean, I have discussions with friends who said, well, maybe there is no virus at all, you know, all these. And what I fear is that if there's, we need a controlled opposition, and I mean not controlled by the by the guys who actually install this whole program. I mean, controlled meaning that we all understand together what we want to achieve.
Right.
And if everybody comes up with another theory, that is
just lost,
totally absurd, then we are divided, and then and that's how we get conquered. You know, we should actually go back to the science and understand what the science is.
I agree.
So here, I provide all the science in my book, but what I'm not doing is I'm saying there is actually conspiracy behind it. It could be, but I'm not sure. It's very likely, because I show...
well, that was going to be my next question, right? I always ask everyone that sits in that seat, who is the they? Is there a they? Is this somewhat chaotic? Is it greed-based? Is it ego-based? Is it power-driven? I mean, I think a lot of it could be explained by that. I still, as much as I do this show every week, I point out all of the things. I mean, this book, I would say you probably got me closer to thinking, boy, does this look planned, than anything else I've read so far. So, you know, and I was going to ask you, because you don't really hand it to me. You don't hand me the book and say, so they planned this, but...
yeah. It would not be scientific anymore to just say that, because I have no evidence for that, but I have some very good hints. So, for example, everybody knows that the spike protein is toxic for the brain. It was known to everybody in the scientific community. So the virus was produced as a bioweapon. Of course, it could be just a game in a lab, you know.
Yeah.
And maybe it really happened to be accidentally, you know, moved out. Just let's assume that, because we have nobody said I take.
But as you point out in the book, and I've said, but there is a question.
Yeah,
I mean, while we say lab origin, that doesn't end the conversation. Now the question is accidental or on purpose. But we don't have proof. But it should be on the table of questions we're asking.
Yeah, absolutely. But if I can't really answer this question beyond any doubt, you know, in a let's say in a lawsuit.
So let's be as conservative as we can.
Yeah, but what I know is the spike protein is toxic, and what it makes it really toxic is the furin cleavage site. So now, if the virus escape was just an escape by accident, let's assume. Besides that, how did they get the vaccine out so quickly and all these kind of things? But they decided on the spike protein, including the furin cleavage site, as a vaccination program. So they decided on the most toxic part of it.
Right.
I mean, I'm a molecular geneticist. A single point mutation in the spike protein code would have removed the cleavage site, but they left it in. They decided to infect essentially with this mRNA every cell. Why not just use a protein? Why use a vehicle like the lipid nanoparticles, which were produced and generated to enter the brain?
Designed to enter the brain. It was designed to help drugs that we wanted to get to the brain, and then we used that as the encapsulation.
And it was known that it enters the brain. It was a brain that was published, you know, by the European Safety Community Authority. And then why you showed the data, you know, little children, you know, youngsters don't have a problem, but why do we force them to get injected?
Right.
Doesn't make sense. And then there's another portion of the virus, like the nucleocapsid. The nucleocapsid had proven to be more and more stable when you got infected to provide you with immunity. And it was proposed. I've seen papers in 2020 proposing by scientists why don't you use a nuclear capsid? It would be completely non-toxic to people to do the immunization this way.
Right.
And then, least of all, why do an immunization at all? Just give the people vitamin D. And not create a propaganda, a very strong propaganda narrative that vitamin D is not useful, it's nonsensical and even dangerous for people at levels that are completely natural. So taking that together, well, the jury is my reader, you know.
Yeah. And it's amazing now, and people aren't just doing this once, they're doing this twice, 3 boosters, 4 boosters. I will say, also what gives me hope is a relatively large group of the population that turned this down, ignored the greatest, worldwide propaganda campaign that we've ever seen.
Yeah, and that was actually shown in the experiment of Selon Michael Nehls, and I provided the information in the book. If this experiment was like this, you have 12 people, 11 were instructed to say something wrong. All the same, this is wrong. And it's actually right, but the 12th person thought these all...
Right, these group experiments where they just have the whole group,
the other 11...
They're all in on it.
Yeah, they thought they were freely, deciding. Yeah. And so, well, if all these 11 think this is wrong, then it must be wrong, even if I see that it's right. So, but 20% or so actually,
in that zone.
But if from this 11 which were instructed to say something wrong, only one of them was instructed to say the correct thing. So it was only 10. The 12th person was more inclined to follow his own common sense than the mass. So if these 20% speak out loudly,
so you only need to have one person confirming your perspective,
and suddenly
it'll trigger. If you're sitting there, it'll allow you to make the right decision.
The numbers change.
Follow you. Wow.
And I can say one thing, and that's the main reason
really great point.
The main thing I wrote this book, besides that I want to have a life for my children and my grandchildren to be in a free world, and we have to remember in centuries. People have fought for freedom, and now we just give it up so easily. It can't happen. Mm-hmm. But the main reason I wrote this book is because I believe that when you have certain knowledge, with this knowledge comes also responsibility. You cannot just sit here and say, "Oh, I know about this, but I'm too fearful to say something about it." With knowledge comes responsibility. Yes. And coming to my last chapter in the book, everybody who listens to us here, I know for sure his adult hippocampal neurogenesis works. Otherwise, he wouldn't be curious enough to sit here and watch us.
Right.
So everybody who watches us has a responsibility. Not just being passive-aggressive, listening and, okay, they are right, and talking about it maybe with the wife or the husband or whatever, but really going out there, talking, being aggressive.
Yes.
Talking to people who are on the verge of actually accepting that there was something wrong.
Yes.
Yeah, we're growing this bubble, where we are in at the moment, or feel like being in, growing this bubble, making it from 20% to 30% to 40%. And if only one person who has the right mindset, and everybody who views us here has the right mindset, I'm 100% sure, convinces one other person, we already have a majority.
Right.
And that's what we have to do. And that's what my book is for.
Fantastic, and your book does that as well as any book I have ever read. I don't get up here and just celebrate things that I don't believe in. This is such an important book. I could go on and on. Let me just finish, because one of the thoughts that I had was one of the debates I keep having with myself is 1984 Orwell versus Brave New World. And I've had discussions with people, which is more true now? And you actually bring it up in a book, and you put it in a way that, I really found interesting. And I don't want to, overstate it, because you sort of play both sides. But I would say, in many ways, Matthias Desmet's book is straight 1984. It's how they use, pressure and social pressures to get me to believe that 2 + 2 actually equals 5, standing in that room where I'm the only one that knows the truth, I have to go along with the group, and all of that, the hypnosis, all of that. What you get to hear, I would say that this book to me is the Brave New World side of this equation, and you point out even more horrifying than 1984 is in Brave New World, people are no longer giving birth. It's a medical society. They're controlling you from the time you're born. They're controlling the amount of oxygen getting to your brain in a test tube. And then as you go along, the elites have a brain that works better, and there's the group that are just the workers, the slaves, and they don't want to be elites. They're all happy with where they're at, and if anyone gets out of line, they're told to take a drug, and it's that sort of medical society. And what I think really, why I would say these are two brilliant companion books. One, definitely true. We had a whole psyop, an intellectual, social pressure upon us. But what you're saying is they have injected you with a product that went directly medically at the space in your brain that makes you an individual, that makes you brave, that makes you independent. And they set out, whether on purpose or not, they have shut down that and have led everyone into, you talk about, zombie mode or Alzheimer's, all forms of losing cognition and a recognition of who we really are.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if I'm maybe wrong, even though my subjective, if I would be on the jury, I believe this is not happening just by accident. But it's everybody can judge on that. But even it doesn't matter actually. It doesn't matter if it's on purpose or by accident, it's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really happening.
It is happening.
And my book provides a formula against indoctrination. And this formula against indoctrination is a formula for willpower. It's a formula for curiosity. And it's a formula against Alzheimer's. Just by that, it should be a reason for people to look into the book. Because if we stay healthy mentally, nobody can do us any harm. Yeah. We need this mental immune system to be active, and there's not much we have to do actually to keep it active.
I'm so glad you took the time to join us, made this trip here, especially to take the time to write this very, very important book. It's really an honor and pleasure to get to spend this time.
Thank you, Del. It was a pleasure being here.
All right.
And to be honest, I told you beforehand, this book is maybe, I hope, important, but as important as people like you who actually tell people that this book exists. And even if people don't read the book, at least they got the message. Yeah. And probably 1,000 times more people got at least the message. And that's what we are here for. Thank you very much.
As we do, absolutely. Thank you. I've hit it pretty hard. I'm going to hit it again. You need to get this book. Get on Amazon, wherever you can buy a book. Everybody should own this alongside of Matthias Desmet's book, The Psychology of Totalitarianism. These two books, really, if you want to know what's happened to us and what's going on and what we need to think about in the future and recognize how important it is to be passionate. I don't know if you could tell today, I was really kind of pumped up. It's because I was really excited to talk about this and with the authors. So I can't recommend it enough. This is for you and everyone you know that may still have some neurons growing in your brain.